You are now tuned into the Victims Advocate podcast with the Victims Advocate himself, Brandon Stein. Let's get to it.
You are listening to the Victims Advocate podcast with, of course, yours truly, Brandon Stein. Here with me today, I'm really excited to speak to him. He's got an interesting background. We have Stuart Berman here of RSA Risk Management up in Illinois. I'm here in sunny South Florida. You're in frigid Illinois here in February. Am I right?
That is correct. And thankfully, about 3 weeks ago, I was in Miami for an event for about 3-4 days. So I had a brief warm up and enjoyed Brickell very much.
Yeah. Well, what I always say is I come from the Northeast, and I don't mind the cold weather. I love the cold weather as long as I could go, and then I could leave maybe in a week. Give me a week up there, I'm cool, and then I gotta get back down to the 70-degree weather, especially in the winter. But in any event, that's why Zoom and the technology is great, because these days we don't necessarily need to be in person. But really, it's nice to meet you, nice to speak to you, because what I do know is I think, I'm not sure if you're still a member, I think at some point you were a member of a Provisors networking group. Is that right?
I am a member. I'm still a member of Lake County North, which meets on a Wednesday in Libertyville, Illinois. And I do try and guest in other groups, because Provisors just provides that outstanding forum to meet a lot of people, a lot of serious business people who are looking to expand their network.
Yeah, I mean, that group, we're obviously not going to talk too much about, but we give them a shameless plug. But it's a group of professionals like yourself, and a group of professionals where it's not just a lawyer group or an accountant group or a financial advisor group. It's a variety of professionals, and it gives us the ability where I'm an attorney down here in South Florida, but it allows me to connect with great professionals, like yourself, because my understanding is, in the field of private investigations, that's a diverse field. I know your practice has a number of associates or partners, but you have a very unique niche area that is it frequently comes up in the news when we're talking about financial. Is that right?
That is correct. And just to give you a little bit of background, RSA, Risk Management and Investigations, RSA is kind of a kitschy acronym. Stands for Retired Special Agents. So my business partner came from the U.S. Secret Service. I retired as the special agent in charge of the United States General Services Administration Office of Inspector General. Now, an Office of Inspector General is different from a traditional law enforcement agency, in that we work 3 different types of investigations. Where the FBI would work 1, criminal investigations, we work criminal, civil, and administrative. And especially at the GSA Inspector General, we worked, in terms of civil, we worked False Claims Act and KETAM cases, which averaged in economic damages to the government somewhere between $300 and $750 million.
So when we're talking about damages to the government, are we talking about private individuals who are perpetuating some sort of fraud or scheme where they're defrauding government bodies, government entities, or is it money that the government has to utilize to investigate, prosecute these types of claims?
That's a great question. In almost all of these cases that we worked, these were contractors, vendors to the United States government, to the General Services Administration, which is the landlord and the contracting branch. So we would see a lot of like False Claims Act, where they would double bill, they would overbill, they would bill and not provide services or goods for it. They would provide goods that are in violation of Trade Act agreement. So we saw a lot of those false claims, but because it's a government contract, they usually run into the hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah, and these exclusively involve private entities who enter into a contract with the government, and they develop these schemes where, like you say, do they double bill for goods or double charge for services, something along those lines, and then it obviously balloons into some high dollar figures.
And we saw a lot of contract fraud cases, especially where contractors would provide goods, especially electronics and technology, from non-designated countries. So, like, let's say they were providing something, like they were supposed to provide Cisco routers. They would go to China, Shenzhen, China, and buy a router, and they would over-label it with a false Cisco label. So we worked a lot of those inferior quality product substitution and non-designated country False Claims Act cases.
So is it essentially knockoffs where, like you have a knockoff Rolex or something, and not Rolex obviously, but knockoff technology where they get it from cheaper countries, it develops cheaper, the engineering is cheaper, everything's cheaper, but they slap a I don't know, some name brand label on it and upsell at that price?
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. And as I always say, there's no such thing as a new crime. That every type of crime that's been committed is still being committed. The only things that change are the props, the technology, the means, but it's very much the same type of counterfeit product crime.
So I wanted to ask you about that, because when you're dealing with this type of financial crime or false claims, as the technology changes, the government, when you're a federal agent, you have to remain either lockstep or even one step ahead of where the technology is. So was there some sort of training that you had to continuously undertake when you're working for the federal government to make sure that, hey, what's coming out of China or coming into the States, and we have to stay one step ahead of it?
Not only did we have constant training, at least once or twice a year, we would be sent to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia, for advanced training. But the truth of the matter is, federal criminal investigations has really become like the field of medicine, with a bunch of specialists. So we would have a cybercrime task force. We would have a white-collar crime task force. We would have a False Claims Act squad. So you really, like you would have an internal medicine specialist. You would also have a cardiovascular thoracic surgeon. And because of technology, we've had to do exactly the same thing.
So is there a quarterback where they're overseeing the entire operation, and they identify the type of crime, they identify the type of suspect, and they say, okay, this team, you have to go and investigate this?
Exactly. And you would have a case agent who would serve as a team leader. Of course, there's a supervisory chain, and as soon as you open a case and you think there is some there, you present it to the United States Attorney's Office, to an assistant United States attorney or an AUSA. So, you will have several cooks in the kitchen at that point.
Right. Now,
and it becomes a well-managed, well-oiled team.
So my question is, to get this type of job, this is not something you apply as if, it's a first time, first up and comer, applying to McDonald's or, Office Depot. Is there specific education or training, like a prerequisite, that you need to even be considered for this type of role? Or do you just fall into it?
So, each agency has their requisites for this, such as the FBI. They would have their attorney, CPA, computer IT, computer science, and then they have a generalist where you bring some specific area of knowledge. The agency that I went to, the Office of Inspector General, it really was coming in with a financial background, and prior to that, I spent close to 5 years with the state of Illinois Department of Securities doing audits and investigations, specializing in investigating promissory note Ponzi schemes. So I brought the financial acuity to the table to be able to investigate these high dollar amount contract fraud investigations.
So when we're talking about this, you mentioned Ponzi schemes. So in terms of schemes that lay people like myself have heard about, where innocent people have fallen victim to, I always immediately think of Bernie Madoff. I mean, that's he's the all-time. I think it's the largest Ponzi scheme in world history or something, right?
Absolutely. And I believe he had a place probably not too far from where you are. And generally a Ponzi scheme, they all work almost the same way, where you see someone who sells an unregistered investment. An investment, depending on what it is, needs to be registered in that state. There are blue sky laws, which some would have to be registered in every state. It would have to be registered with the State Department of Securities. So someone would sell an investment that's not registered that they create. And that's the first level, known as a tranche. And what they usually...
You just said a couple things there. So when we're talking about, you say blue sky laws, is that disclosures where it's public information, where if someone comes to you, approaches me and sells an investment, you say it must be registered in the state in which they're selling that investment? So me as a consumer, if you will, I can go and look into it to check its validity, do my own research, ask around, get a second opinion. Is that what you're referring to when you say blue sky laws and registration?
Exactly. Every state has a State Department of Securities. They're almost always part of the Secretary of State, which is known for registering business. So in terms of an investment, a determination is made as to what type of security it is. So whether it's a limited partnership or it's a or it's a bond or it's a stock, whatever it is, if it's an investment, that state in their security law has a requirement that it be registered, it must be registered in that state. If it's going to be sold in a different state, that other state may have its own set of laws of how registration would go.
So just so I can understand, someone like Madoff, you're approaching consumers saying, hey, I have an investment opportunity for you. I have an investment option, what have you. I can get you a 15% return on your investment. Is that the entry point that all these Ponzi scheme manipulators or the owners of the Ponzi schemes that they enter?
That is 100% it. And usually, and I've seen this time and time again, that the person running the Ponzi scheme is a tremendous narcissist, because they're going to offer you something higher than what you would see for rates for like a treasury bill, a treasury bond, a corporate bond, or a bank CD. So if a bank product or a treasury product is at 7%, they'll offer you 11%. And their mindset is they will go into the stock market and actively day trade or trade stocks, and they will make their money on the spread, on that differential, on that delta. And usually what happens is they lose that money and they're unable to pay. So they sell tranche number 2, to go pay tranche number 1. Then they sell tranche number 3 to pay off tranche number 2.
And when you say tranche, the client, like let me go get another sucker, if you will. Let me get, in their eyes, they're viewing everyone like suckers. So let me get them to contribute $100,000, and that person, I'm gonna help pay back the person I just lost money, and it kind of builds on each other.
Exactly. And by client, usually what you see is they will go and find several clients. So they will prospect for a period of time. If their initial sale of unregistered investments was $1 million, they're going to go out on tranche 2 and try and raise at least $1 million, if not more, to pay off tranche number 1. They usually lost that money trading. So now they have to actively, they have this ongoing concern of loss, which they have to feed by constantly raising new levels of money.
So my question is, if the way they're, I guess, compensating for their losses for these different tranches or customers, if you will, how are they making money? How is the owner of the Ponzi scheme, someone like Bernie Madoff, how is he benefiting from it? Is it just he's playing the same day trading risk as the next guy, and if he wins, he wins. If he loses, guess what? It's not my money.
Exactly. And sometimes while they're doing it, they're feathering their own nest. So they're just outright, taking money out of a client account and putting it in their own accounts, because they know they have Bernie Madoff had the incredible ability to raise capital. And that's why it grew so large. He endeared himself to high net worth investors, to the Hollywood class. So he was able to constantly raise new capital.
And is the lifeblood, or the gasoline of a Ponzi scheme, like for using Bernie Madoff as an example, it's the ability to continuously raise money. And the minute you have that ability, or you lose that ability to raise money, everything runs dry and it collapses on itself.
Exactly. The very second one that I worked in was out of Rockford, Illinois. And it was a small broker there who actually, he was a deacon in the Archdiocese of Rockford. And he used his position as a deacon to court everyone as potential investors. Now, he grew this to over $12 million in Rockford, Illinois, not a huge town. And what happened is he became ill. He developed pancreatic cancer. So when he stopped paying on all these different levels, complaints went to his office. When he wasn't at his office because he was in the hospital with pancreatic cancer, those complaints then went to the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI. And once they knew something was wrong, they called the state, who had, tremendous experience in being able to investigate a promissory note Ponzi scheme. So it collapsed due to illness and non-payment of the early tranches.
So let me ask you, if I'm being solicited by one of these individuals, these Ponzi scheme owners, do they have a whole database or software set up where, it shows you your investment, it shows you how much money you have, it shows you your returns, where there's a whole organization to it? It's not just something as simple as asking someone for money and then taking the money and then a phone call, hey, your investment's up 15%, great news.
Unfortunately, we're living in technological times, and we've seen these schemes today, especially in the area of cryptocurrency investments of this nature, where the team that's soliciting these investments will go ahead and set up websites, dashboards, and portals. So and they're so advanced that they even have their own app that you could put on an iPhone or an Android, where you could look at your investment that doesn't exist.
It's phony money.
Absolutely. So, if you're solicited, call the state. You have to do your own due diligence today. And especially anyone who starts texting you, anyone who texts you and they'll try and endear yourself. We call these rom-cons, romantic con jobs. So we see them a lot with cryptocurrencies and foreign investments, and they put together tremendous dashboards where you can watch your money grow. And then you see that initial growth. And then they text you or call you back saying, I just got you 75% on your initial 50,000. Let's go big. Cash out your 401k. And then we see transfer of $500,000, $1 million.
Yeah.
So we have a cybersecurity squad at RSA. We investigate this and we usually package it up for presentation.
Yeah, because what you hear in the media now is, just Liam Neeson comes to mind, because there's I guess that's what rom-com is, rom-con is, or romance fraud, where you have these impersonators posing as Liam Neeson or famous actor Tom Cruise or whoever. And what do? They say, hey, look, I need some gift cards. It seems like they start small to earn trust and then work their way up to, I guess, a 401k or something.
Exactly. And we see that we see that in almost all crime. So, in my like 30 years of investigating allegations of criminal acts, you'll see a testing period. And you'll see it go from a testing period where after no one knocks on their door and shows them federal credentials, after a few weeks, you'll see an increase in both the frequency, the duration, and the amount. So and then at some point they're off to the races.
Yeah, because even if you're talking about like wire fraud or something along those lines, you have these charges even on your credit card statement or your bank statement of like $7. You don't know where it's from, you don't know where it came from, but it keeps popping up here and there. Is that an example where, hey, they're testing the waters, they're seeing how much they could get away with it, they're seeing if there's any repercussions to even that small amount, and then they're just going to, boom, work their way up to something larger and more impactful?
Absolutely. If you were to look at trend analysis of financial crimes, you'll always see that testing period, and then you'll always see it just, make a very quick, increase. Looking at that line, a very quick, horizontal increase on it. For years at GSA Inspector General, we worked government credit card fraud cases. So whether it was a purchase card that government employees use for equipment and staffing and emergency purchases, or it was a card associated with a vehicle fuel purchase card, you would see that testing period. And a lot of times, when we were working the street cases, you would see someone get their hands on a government fuel purchase card, and they would stop after work because you see where it registered, and they would put gas in their personal vehicle. And a week later, a personal vehicle. And a couple of days later, a personal vehicle and that of a spouse. A few days later, they were lining 25 cars up in front of a Shell gas station, seeking to charge half price in cash to fuel people's cars. And then, of course, we would watch these patterns, determine the patterns, set up on them, and go ahead with an arrest operation.
Yeah, it's wild. And when you think of crime and victims of crime, you instantly go victims of shootings, victims of assault, of other violent crime. But I would imagine if it's not equal, maybe even greater, victims of financial or non-violent crime, the white collar, is more prevalent because there's a bigger target, and you have some really sophisticated people, unfortunately, on the other side that are, developing these schemes, whether it's Ponzi schemes or the fraud like you're talking about,
And they have the ability to do it faceless.
Yeah.
They get to hide behind a computer screen anywhere in the entire world to do it. So that presents new challenges in and of itself.
I think that's the big thing. They don't have to be in front of you. They could be anywhere, in any country, in any state. It doesn't matter. And as long as they have the financial and the technological capabilities, anyone can be a victim. But yeah, well, Stuart, this is interesting stuff, man. And you've said a lot, but I don't think you've said it all. So I really have a million things I wanted to go through with you. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about Enron or some of these other schemes that, the big ones. But I think we could save that for part 2.
Let's definitely save it for part 2.
Yeah.
I enjoyed talking about it. I would certainly like to, espouse further. And, I unfortunately, and I know you said this would be a conversation, I really didn't have an opportunity to learn, very much about Brandon Stein. And I would love to do so.
Yeah. Well, that could be maybe part 3 if people want to hear about it. I don't know. But, the stuff you're talking about may be more interesting than just my law life. But that's okay. So listen, Stuart, my man, I appreciate the time. I appreciate the attention today. I think it's really interesting stuff. I think there's a lot more to talk about, but like I said, that could be for the next one. So thanks for the time, man.
Thank you. Look forward to talking again.
That's a wrap. Thanks for joining us on the Victims Advocate podcast with Brandon Stein, and we'll see you on the next one. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at The Victim Advocate, on YouTube at The Victims Advocate, and visit our website at victimadvocate.com.